Hello and good football to all. I'm AJ, and with me is our special guest, my pops. Welcome, Dad. On this podcast, we talk football and only football, so help us God. Welcome
Amen.
to the bonus episode, Clemson Review Boston College Week. Dad, shall we football? And again, the traditional answer is yes, or we just never speak again.
Well, we'll say yes then, but I was tempted.
This is why you are not a regular, because you can't be trusted. So, Dad, was this the biggest win you've seen since I've been alive? Notre Dame over Clemson in South Bend, double overtime, number one team in the land.
Actually, I think we're going to talk about it later in the show, but it's yes and no. The Florida State game, when you were 3 years old, was
okay. Pause.
Big
let me preface
game.
this. When you've been watching with me,
when I'm watching with you,
and while absolutely. I was a genius 3-year-old, still was unable to comprehend the majesty of Notre Dame football. So since I've been watching Notre Dame football with you, honestly, which is probably 2002, I'm 30, a very young and spry 30, but 30 nonetheless. I really started paying attention, I think, 2002 when we had Carlisle Holiday and Tyrone Willingham. Yep. So since then, is this number one?
By far.
Just bringing smiles to my face here. I'm
Lord.
still giddy.
Yeah, I am too. It was pretty special.
So on that note, this whole podcast will be incredibly, I don't want to say biased. It will be biased, but not in the traditional sense of Notre Dame being better than everyone, although we're better than everyone. But I think one team so far, at least as per the Associated Press, more so we are going to talk from exclusively a Notre Dame angle without regard to what all the little people, all those smaller teams and directional schools, what their vantage points and viewpoints are. So
my question to you is there another angle? Because I can't think of one.
Well, that's what makes us so short-sighted.
Yes. Oh, no question.
Adorably short-sighted. So let's get to the meat and potatoes. Notre Dame beats Clemson. Number 4 beats number 1 at home, 47-40 in double overtime. If you haven't seen it yet, I don't know what to tell you. It's not great. So I talked to you a little bit before this that I think Notre Dame had a chance early in this game to put it away. 23-13 at halftime, okay? Mm-hmm. And that's 3 field goals. Plus, later on in the game, there's a go-ahead touchdown that is fumbled in the end zone. This game, so at regulation, we're talking 33-33. I think that could have been something closer to mid-30s to early 20s, especially now. I mean, we knew that DJ Uiagalelei, I butchered it, Uiagalelei. So we knew he was going to throw the ball, and we knew that from pretty much Jump Street, as soon as Clemson touched the ball first, that Travis Etienne was going to be the focal point, and he was not going to get yards, and that DJ was going to have to beat Notre Dame on his own. And I still think it changes the way you play defense if you're at 27-13 versus 23-13, and maybe even 31-13.
Well, I think where you're going with this, AJ, is Notre Dame dominated a lot of the game, and they did. They really had control of the process, except for the third quarter, and that. So, what was really great, I think, the statements that were made in this game were severalfold. Number one was Brian Kelly learns to win the big one. Obviously, that speaks volumes for how well Brian has coached and really got this team bought into what they think they can't get done and can't accomplish. They've done a terrific job, and they got one over the top. But I think equally, if not more, is Ian Book's performance, in the fact that he was cool as a cucumber and he was up for the moment. He was able to be confident, able to be stable, able to be a leader when the ball was snapped. And I think of all the snaps he took, he only had about 2 or 3 that really were confounding on what he did with the football, but the rest of them were spectacular. And I really give him props, because let's face it, during that third quarter going into the fourth quarter, there was a lot of air going out of the room for the Fighting Irish. All of us are watching it at home, that was for sure, and probably watching it at the stadium. And while he was able to make that comeback, or was just really sweet to see for both he and Kelly. So I think those were 2 real critical things that transpired for those individuals. As a team, I think that Notre Dame, has always been able to do some things offensively, but really struggled defensively. And I think that they really handled the game defensively. Now, you can't say that giving up 439 yards and 2 touchdowns to DJ was a spectacular finish. But if you go back and look, they gained 34 yards and 33 carries, with ETN averaging 1.5 yards a carry. I just don't think it gets a whole lot better than that. So,
what's crazy is I think he actually, to me, he looked every bit as advertised. And I'd seen him play before. Obviously, Notre Dame has played them before, and he is an absolute stud, which goes without saying. But even with that low output, he still looked like a baller.
Oh, he did. I think, if and it was late in the game, I can't remember who made the tackle, but they grabbed him by the foot after he broke through the line. And that if he doesn't grab him by the foot and take him down, he's going off for the races. I think that, he was always capable of exploding, but, when he would bust up a tackle the first time, and even the second time, there were more gold helmets being attracted to him, being able to get to him in time to take him down. He was a lot more effective, quite honestly, coming out of the backfield, which, I think everybody and their brother predicted that that's how they're going to utilize him most in the game. But when you give a guy 18 carries in a college game, you do not expect the outcome to be 28 yards, and that's what it was. So
and that includes a long of 13, by the way. So doing a little math there, that's 15 yards on 19 carries.
Don't you do the math? That's not your specialty.
You know what? In the regular Shall We Football podcast, that is my specialty. Well, and I don't know. I gave myself that specialty, so they don't know
you did.
How bad I am at math.
I could share with your team there your grades in math, and I think I could probably have a convincing battle. But I digress. I think
you give me politics to talk, and I can at least make people think I know what I'm talking about. But go on.
Yeah, I don't think they care, but I understand that.
No,
I think that we struggled. If we had one struggle, it was in the defensive backfield, where we allowed too many yards. I think between Powell and Rogers, totaling about 300 yards in the air. That was a little tough.
295 to be exact. Yeah, so pretty.
But what?
Wasn't close.
When you're playing the number 1 team, and let's face it, DJ, I don't know what Lawrence could have done better when he has almost a 90 quarterback rating and comes up with statistics with no turnovers. It's tough to think that our boy Lawrence would have gotten a whole lot more out of that particular day. So I'm really impressed with the overall play of Notre Dame. They're up. They had their hearts starting to be broken. We thought that the same old was going to happen, and they didn't. And I think the other one that's really stepped up for the Irish was Karen Williams again. He in OT, he was spectacular. And the other group I got to give credit for was, we had 10 negative tackles for the game. You think about how highly rated and dominant, Clemson's offense is, and they get 10 tackles for losses. Just think about that, absorb that. That's the number one team with, 5-star athletes across the board, and we have 10 tackles for losses.
Well, Notre Dame doesn't recruit the defensive line like they did, during the Charlie Weiss area, but Notre Dame's always recruited the defensive line decently. The development is so much better. I mean, within the last 3 years, these players were mostly still on the team, right? And they lost players like Julian Aquara and Khalid Kareem, and these guys just, they just step right in. And that's really, really, it's reassuring to know that with a Clark Lee defense and with Brian Polian and Brian Kelly recruiting, that you can plug and play, that there's just somebody ready behind. And we'll get a little bit into recruiting before we move on to the Boston College game coming up, but go ahead.
Well, amazing as it sounds in a 47-40 ball game, but a lot of Notre Dame, the vast majority of Notre Dame players made the plays they had to make when they had to make them. And I'll go back to a little known situation that probably a lot of folks would have covered, but we were trapped deep in our end, and we've been struggling with punting, and Bramblett hit a 54-yarder that changed the dynamic on the field and the field position. And boy, that was a hell of a punt at the right time when we needed it. Allowed us to stabilize where we were in the field of, as far as where the ball was on the field, and was huge. Of course, the defense, they got 430 yards through the air, but
that's loaded. That's absolutely loaded. That's 2 overtimes worth of yards as well. And first of all, this defense was designed for this game to give up a ton of yards through the air. So I mean, those stats are padded with the overtime.
Young lad, may I share my thoughts on that?
Fire away.
This is where experience really plays large, youngin'. And that is, in overtime, you can only pick up 25 yards at a time, which they did in the first overtime. But they lost yards in the second overtime. And let's talk about that. The defensive rush, we only had 2.5, I think it was 2 sacks. And they were had in that series of plays in the second overtime. I mean, these defensive linemen looked like they got shot out of a cannon and just were all over DJ at the right and critical time. And, that boy was shell-shocked by all those moves. So again, that just talks about the timing of it all. We had good pressure on him most of the game. We didn't really scare him a whole lot, but we had a lot of pressure on him. But, during that overtime, my goodness, that lad couldn't get anywhere. So I think in overtime, they had a total of about 12 to 15 yards would be my guess, and offensive yardage.
The first play was a 25-yard strike,
right,
when they were on offense. So that's 25 yards. You subtract that 25 yards from the 439 they had, and you're getting dangerously close to being under 400, which is not only not the record against Notre Dame, it's better optics when there's not a 4 in front of that 3-digit number. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid your hat's on a little too tight. I still think 400 plus yards is a lot to give up during regular season, regulation time. And but like you said, it was designed to go that way, and it went that way. we, at the end of the day, when the dust settled, we got the W. And it was a well played, one of the best played football games I have ever seen. Granted, they made mistakes, but we created those mistakes. So let's take a look at that fumble that went right back to, the NTN had, that went right in the arms of your favorite player of all time at Notre Dame and took it to the house. At least he did via the referees. I think we saw that
was not a
television. It might have been a bit short, but hey, why do they think they call it the luck of the Irish?
Yeah, I've been hesitant to use that phrase while I've watched Notre Dame because while Notre Dame has gotten lucky, Notre Dame has gotten lucky a lot. That's been pretty well counterbalanced with how unlucky we've been earlier on.
And go ahead.
No, go ahead.
If I may, even look at the stats. Even though Hayes only had 2 total tackles, by the way, both of them for losses, including one as a sack, he seemed to play a much better game than what that revealed. Foskey also stepped up large. Here's an interesting statistic. The total tackles made, the team was led with 9 with White and your man, but Kyle Hamilton had 8 solo tackles.
What I learned is that in listening to some of the breakdowns post game is that he was to be locked on ETN all game, at least visually. That was his designated role, which saw him less playing. He played center field a fair amount, but he did have responsibilities all game to worry about outside of his regular responsibilities, where he had to zero in on ETN for the whole game.
Yeah, well, he did well. ETN, we talked about his running statistics, and I'm not sure he had the responsibility for him coming out of the backfield to catch passes. I doubt he had.
I think he had some. Sometimes they're going to scheme ETN to favorable matchups, which coaches and offensive coordinators do for all their important offensive weapons. But ETN did tie for the team lead in catches with 8 on Clemson.
Right.
And he had 57 yards, which is pretty good for a running back. But let's be real, he was kept in check.
Right. Well, I think the other thing we need to really appreciate in this game is the yards that Ian Book picked up running. And we've talked about that, in the pregame conversation, but live, sure, he fumbled in that one ball going in the end zone. That was tough. He really did a great job in picking his spots to run, and he gained a lot of significant yards in really critical situations. Again, I think we talked about at the beginning, at least I did in the pregame, saying what was his decision making after 1 second, but before 3 seconds in the passing scheme. And I thought that he really stepped up his game. He was definitive in what he was doing. He moved a lot in that pocket. Now, sometimes it wasn't as successful as we would have liked when he rolled, especially to the right, but he didn't take off, but he created time and space everywhere he went. And again, I think that drove the Clemson defense nuts. But those 67 yards he picked up were really critical yards at the right times when you hit them. So, I think kudos to, Irish Nation, but kudos really to Book and to Coach, because they got significant monkeys off their backs.
I agree. And I'm not sure if they spied him very much. I think they had Venables spying him a little bit. The defensive coordinator for Clemson's kid who caused that fumble. I think they had him spying him a bit, but I think they ran the quarterback draw a couple times, but most of that yardage came on the scrambles, which is to me, if you're going to consider Book a special quarterback, which at this point it's really hard not to, that's what makes him the most special, is that those legs can make him clutch, regardless of what his arm does. And his arm is pretty clutch. I mean, this game, it was as clutch as he's ever been, and as clutch as I've ever seen a Notre Dame quarterback be. But that running ability, first of all, it's extremely underrated. I think that's what makes him – I think that's the most important thing for him having the record he does and being unbeaten at home.
Yeah. Well, you go back to that one of those drives, AJ, you're talking about that turned into field goals, and our boy Meyer, who's a terrific football player, but you love him. You know, he makes a great move in the goal line and just has the ball delivered to him perfectly and takes his eye off of it.
Incredibly tough throw, by the way. A super tough throw that he made work, which was brilliant and ill-advised to throw across your body. But that's what playmakers do. And the other thing I got to give him is just what we talked about, throwing the ball up at a place where your receiver can battle for it, not where they have to battle to it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're battling to it, then you're battling to keep a defensive back from getting the ball. And he threw it at a place where it wasn't out of bounds, which is what he had done a lot through in the season up until this game. He actually gave those guys a chance, and it was neat to see him show the ability to give them a chance, because that was one of the questions. I mean, we see him not giving them a chance on these deep balls. So can he, or is he just a little spooked? And I honestly think a lot of the issues with Ian Book are mental, which is crazy because he's a pretty confident dude. He seems to be a decent leader. He doesn't seem to be too rah-rah, but he seems to be a pretty good leader, and it's clear that the team loves him.
Well,
and he makes these clutch plays, and he's really he seems to rise to the moment for the most part. And here's the other thing: Notre Dame doesn't really have that many moments, right? We have 1 or 2 games a year where we have moments where players need to rise. And I mean, they've been clutch. That Louisville game was clutch. That was huge for Ian Book when he went in for the go-ahead score and took it in himself and danced around the sideline to get into the end zone. That was huge. But this was the first. I mean, we had last year. It was what, Georgia, Michigan, and then what? The rest of the games were, with some exceptions, relatively uneventful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens with Notre Dame, is they have a couple games a year, at least the past few years. And that was one of the big talking points, was that they didn't show up in those moments, but they showed up here. Here's another thing, is that I want to go back to the yardage through the air, is that when you're a lot of those yards were essentially garbage yards, playing from behind with a really good quarterback. And it'd be impossible to not to acknowledge that Uiagalelei is a fantastic quarterback. And I do think, if we're being honest with ourselves, Trevor Lawrence would do better. I really think that he's just, I mean, how can you, I mean, he's won a national championship, huge numbers, pretty much already designated the number 1 overall pick. It just blows me away that people don't think he would have done better for this team. I honestly think the way Notre Dame played, they would have risen to the occasion.
Well, so you're contradicting yourself again, Young, and I'm a dad. I can point that out, can't I, on live?
You do whatever you want.
Yeah, but anyways, when you stack up 439 yards, 2 touchdowns, a quarterback rating of 90, it's difficult to beat all that. We could debate that forever, but that quarterback, everybody love to have a backup quarterback like that. But let's also go back and take a look. If you take a look at the starting talent when these kids came out of high school, there is no way Notre Dame should win this game. we're dealing with 3s and 4s and a few 5s. They're dealing with 5s and 4s, and if you're a 3, it was a mistake that you made that team.
Or your Brett Venables kid.
Well, that can help. There's not what you know, right? But I think this
no shade there. He's actually a pretty good player.
Yeah, he is. You can see him play pretty good football. But that just gives kudos to the coaching of Notre Dame and the development of players when they get there, not when they come in, because if you stack them up, on the ratings and you add all those digits together, we'd be significantly behind Clemson and Alabama and those kinds of teams, that we turn around and become very competitive. In fact, in this case, able to beat somebody, that was ranked number 1 in the country. So, I certainly hope that this conversation that's been going on, where this week, there was only 3 teams, Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State, that we can go ahead and now say it's Alabama, Notre Dame, and you can throw Ohio State in it. Well, obviously they've got a lot left to prove. And then who's the rest? They're going to still probably keep Clemson in that conversation, but do you keep Florida in that conversation with 1 loss? So you've got a lot of 1-loss teams that are floating around out there that like to be that 4th team. And unless something goes crazy and Cincinnati sneaks in there, you're going to have a 1-loss team, at least one there. I think the other thing when you talk about this game as far as the Clemson defense, is their best player did not play that game. And I think that was more critical than, quite honestly, not having Lawrence in there, because DJ did step up huge and took care of business. But number 47,
DJ missed. I understand what you're saying, and they were missing more than just one of their best players. They were missing a handful of players. They were missing the leader of that defense, their middle linebacker. They're also missing a couple of guys up front. Tyler Davis is a really good player. It's one of their starting defensive tackles. They missed probably their best defensive end for the first half. So that team was depleted. That's football, though. Trevor Lawrence is the sad part, because COVID is not a part of football. That is something entirely different. Most of the other guys were injuries, which is a part of football. And you need to have those horses sitting on the bench ready to rock and roll. Now, first of all, I want to say this was the best win of my life. Kudos to the boys. Thanks for bringing us along for this. This was absolutely fantastic, and looking forward to great rest of the year. So let's put a bow on that. And to your point about recruiting, let's talk about that a little bit. Notre Dame is actually, in terms of recruiting average, and I'm going to be referring to 24/7 Sports, IrishIllustrated.com here with all these numbers and such. Notre Dame actually, in terms of their whole roster, they are top 10 in talent, higher than some pretty big schools, and they're not actually that far behind. It's just that Ohio State, Alabama are pretty far and away above like everybody. And you know what's actually kind of unique is that Clemson has a relatively similar approach to what Notre Dame does. And they offer, I mentioned this last week, they offer a lot of the same guys. Dabo Swinney looks for a profile of player that actually fits Notre Dame pretty well. There's a lot of high achieving academic kids that end up going to Clemson. And I think it speaks to how, and this is a cliche, but how important recruits find that family atmosphere. So Notre Dame does recruit a lot of the similar guys, and they pick their spots. What you'll see is a lot of SEC schools, a lot of big schools, you'll see them bring in 24 to 28 recruits a year. Last year, we brought in 17. Clemson does, and now this is not Stanford. by any means, bringing in like 15 to 16 kids a year, and it's so specific. We're kind of close. We do send out significantly more offers. Clemson sends out less offers than Notre Dame does. They get to pick their spots. This year, however, Clemson is a little bit surprisingly, they had a decommit from Corey Foreman, who was a top 3 defensive end, kind of an all-over defensive line player, a versatile defensive line player, pretty big dude. Will Shipley right now, who chose between, back to my point, chose between Notre Dame. I mentioned him last week. He's a running 5-star all-purpose back out of North Carolina. He chose Clemson over Notre Dame. He's their only 5-star right now. Now, their class is a little deeper than ours. Where it's really highlighted with these big schools and their recruiting is on the outside, is cornerbacks, wide receivers. And that's pretty much the big difference. And then quarterback a little bit, but Notre Dame generally gets close to who they want each year with regarding quarterbacks. Now, they've had a couple up and down years. Brendan Clark was not their first choice a couple of years ago. They could have had great. They were shooting for Graham Mertz. And Dad, I don't know if you saw him. He plays for Wisconsin in the one game they played, but he set records in that game. He had 5 touchdowns, I think 1 incompletion with like 20 passes, and they wiped the floor with Minnesota. I don't know if you saw that. They've been COVIDed out for the past few games.
Yeah, I saw that.
But Notre Dame this year, go ahead.
Well, AJ, every year the big home game is when they bring the recruits in.
Mm-hmm.
And you just can't beat the Notre Dame atmosphere and so on and so forth. But what you can beat is some of the times when the big games were there, we came up on the short end of the stick. And the young lads always like to go with winners, and we've been pretty good for a lot of years, but we haven't been great. This year, I think we can say now we've climbed that pole, and this is a great Notre Dame football team. Does one loss make a one win make a team? No, it doesn't, but it's accumulation of work product that you can look at and say these guys are pretty damn good, especially coming off of last year, where we had a couple of, twisted losses, but still showed dominance in a lot of places as well. I think that the team has just really come together and putting themselves in the, in prime time, and they do not have to make any excuses about why they're in prime time. That's really nice to see. And I think that that's going to bode well on recruiting as well. Now, I'm assuming that with everything going on with COVID, that none of the recruits were there. I'm not sure how recruiting world is working.
They were, actually. There's a Hawaiian linebacker named, his last name's Kia.
Okay.
Kahanu Kia, excuse me. He is an outside linebacker from Punahu, which is a huge football powerhouse in Honolulu. Okay. And he was there on his own dime. So these kids this is what they're doing now. And unfortunately, my genuine condolences to the players that can't afford that, because this is a really crappy time for those kids that want to get out to these schools and need the school, because it's been a dead period, by the way, since March, which is just unprecedented, at least in the modern era.
Yeah.
But I feel for those kids. So, Dad, this year, to do a quick profile of the commitment list, they're crushing it on the O-line. They are completely crushing it. Wide receiver, absolutely crushing it again. They added good tight ends. The defense, they need some impact players. Now there's a kid named Prince Coley, who's from Jonesboro, Tennessee. He's a mid 200s 4-star player, but by the time he's actually playing, which is great because a lot of these kids don't get to play this year, and he is absolutely killing it. Offense, defense, he's just a step above everyone else on the field. He's doing fantastically. So real quick though, Notre Dame has had actually a pretty special year given the circumstances. So top 100 player, I mentioned this to you a little bit ago, maybe about a month, Dion Colsey, and get this, from Athens Academy in Athens, Georgia, top 100 wide receiver. Now, rumor was these SEC schools backed off of him a little bit. I don't know. He seems like a very talented player, number 85 in the country as per 24/7 Sports Composite. He decommitted. Notre Dame worked their you-know-what's off and got him back, which is huge. The last time that happened, kid was from Georgia, and that was Stephon Tuitt. Last time we got a player to recommit, at least if my memory serves. So that was huge. There's another kid named Philip Riley, who his 288th ranking, 4-star player out of Bloomingdale High School in Florida. He was with us, decommitted. Unfortunately, this is the cardinal sin, committed to Southern Cal. But he's looking like, and there's a lot of rumors and rumblings. Notre Dame did not break off contact. They look like they might be in a place to bring him back, which is just huge. And he's a cornerback, most important part. And he's way more talented than number 288. So they might get 2 flips this year. Just to wrap this up, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 targets left with 17 commitments here. Let me make sure it's 17.
Sounds like
it's 19. Excuse me.
Yeah, sounds like they're doing well.
They are. So the guys that they're still after, Dad, right now they're looking at 4 top 100 players, number 49, 50, 56, and 85. Now they're all offensive players: O tackle, O guard, quarterback, and wide receiver, respectively, with those numbers. They still are in play for a top 36 running back, Donovan Edwards out of Michigan. They're still in play for Sierra Wright, cornerback out of LA, who's number 72. They're still in play to flip Kelvin Gilliam, weak side defensive end out of Highland Springs, Virginia, who's currently committed to Oklahoma. They're still in play for the recently offered Byron Cardwell, running back out of San Diego. He's number 168 as per the 24/7 Sports Composite ranking, 4-star player. Still in play for Philip Riley at 288. Titus Mokioa Atamalala, out of James Campbell High School in Hawaii, number 297. He's an athlete, safety, wide receiver mix. They're also in the process of trying to flip 6'7", 295 offensive tackle, currently committed to Auburn, number 347, 4-star player Caleb Johnson. And lastly, they are in play for Kia, the outside linebacker out of Honolulu. So they are still in the running for some big players. And I've done the math. I know I shouldn't be doing that, but I've used the class calculator that they have for Irish Illustrated and calculated if they added the majority of these players, they could, by the numbers, have a class as good as the 2013 class that included Jalen Smith and Max Redfield. Some of these guys didn't pan out, but the late Greg Bryant, RIP, Terrion Folston, a lot of amazing players in that class. And that put Notre Dame in the top 5. I think they were number 3 that year. But they're actually, like, if they end strong, and certainly beating Clemson is a way to get closer to that, Notre Dame could end up with the best class since their last best class since Charlie Weiss.
Yep. Well, they've got the whole offensive line, it looks like, to have to be replaced. So it's glad to hear that these guys are coming in up, and hopefully they've got some guys already there that are.
They do. You better believe they do.
So they've always been strong there, and that's nice to see. They do need some work at wide receiver, so that's really good. You always can use defensive backs, as you talked about. And we're going to have to replace some pretty special linebackers and speed defensive ends. So, we've got a few guys that are there already, but we've got some work to do as far as that's concerned, for next year. But let's worry about next year.
Yeah. Pops, they're there. Isaiah,
Good.
Listen for these names: Paul Moala, Isaiah Pryor, number 33, Shane Simon had his best game in a Notre Dame uniform against Clemson. Stepped up huge. He'll be there. They still got Jack Lamb, maybe a transfer candidate. Don't know. Maris Leafau, J.D. Bertrand. They're stocked at linebacker. Same with defensive end. Ovia Gofu played. Isaiah Foskey, number 7, stud. Still has some time left in a Notre Dame uniform. Jordan Botello, he's the one that absolutely mauled that punter and scored the touchdown off that blocked punt.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
he is. Pretty sweet. They talk about him being the craziest player on that team, just unbridled aggression, and it comes out on the field. Yeah, he looks like the meanest guy in a uniform. So I'm excited to see him play. The cupboard is stocked, I can tell you. The only place that's concerning a little bit is safety and cornerback, really, in terms of depth and what's coming up. But they seem to be able to get that done pretty well. Wide receivers also actually pretty stocked, but they've got guys that are freshmen, really highly touted guys. Kevin Austin. You know what? They talk about all these Clemson guys. We were missing number 0, Braden Lindsey, fastest kid on the team. Former top 100 wide receiver out of Florida, Kevin Austin. Same deal. He was injured and had some issues last year, but they were talking throughout spring training, or what ended up being the equivalent of spring training. He was easily, as reported by the team and the coaches, as the best wide receiver on the team by a pretty large margin. So Notre Dame was missing offensive skill players, and that doesn't really get talked about. So, Dad, let's parlay this into a preview real quick of Boston College. It needs to be stated right off the bat that yes, former Notre Dame 4-star top 100 quarterback Phil Dracovic out of Pine Richland in Gibsonia, Pennsylvania, is the starting quarterback. Yeah, YAPA is the quarterback for Boston College. He was not able to beat out Ian Book, but he's playing pretty darn good football. He has 2,083 yards passing. They're 40th in the country through the air. He runs the ball pretty well. He was a dual threat quarterback coming out of high school. And they were up on Clemson at halftime, just like Notre Dame was, but obviously they don't have the rest of the horses that Notre Dame has. He has 15 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, been sacked 22 times. How are you feeling about this game up in Boston College?
Well, again, youngin, I've got a few more stripes.
I know what's coming here. Go on.
Yes. So I remember in 1993, late November, when I'm babysitting you, and
I'm your kid. How do you babysit a kid that belongs to you?
Well, because I was left alone with you, and you and Marky, and I just remember having to try to keep an eye on 2 children and the Boston College game.
Is that Flutie?
No, Flutie was gone by then. That was 7-8 years past Flutie. But all I can remember of the game is that we scored late to take the lead. And then when Boston College, we had a lead by 1 or 2 points. Boston College gets the ball, and I'm forgetting the middle linebacker's name, but he was a great middle linebacker. Threw a ball right at his face mask. He had it right in his hands and drops it. 2 plays later, if I again remember correctly, or a couple more plays maybe, but they kick the ugliest field goal I have ever seen. The ball was knuckling, but it went straight for whatever reason and beat us. And this is, of course, right after we beat Florida State at home. And we're going to go to Boston College again after a big win last week. Now, I always like to say we're better prepared this time than last time. I'm not so sure that's a fair statement just because of the years that have transpired since then. But we need to know that this is a good team and we can't come in with a letdown, because they got some confidence playing Clemson. And, obviously the quarterback is going to be pretty stoked up to perform well. And we've got to really watch it. And can we get up for this game? I think we will. I think the team has too much depth to fail, but we do know that we've had a couple of misfire games this year, and we just can't let it happen now, because this is one of the better teams we're playing on our schedule, and we're playing them in Chestnut Hill. That just brings back bad memories.
I'm sure, and you are indeed very old.
A lot of scar tissue too. A lot of scar tissue.
So they on defense are averaging giving up 373 yards per game, which is actually not too bad, but they are 90th in points given up per game. And they are giving up more points than they are scoring. They are about 2 yards from giving up more points per game. They're 84th. They're 90th in points for at 26.1, 84th in points against at 24.
So AJ, how do you get the 2 yards involved in that?
They score 2 yards more, 2 points more per game
okay.
than they give up.
Yeah.
They're 110th in rushing yards, which I remember hearing someone bring it up is crazy for a Boston College team that just got rid of AJ Dillon to the draft, and they were almost exclusively getting their offensive production from the ground, but Phil Jurkovec has changed that a little bit. So Let's get down to our game picks here. Notre Dame is what they are. They are giving up they're not giving up very many points. Now the Clemson game is going to skew that a little bit. Their offensive output is pretty fabulous right now, especially being boosted by a 47-point game with 500 or so yards. But let's take a look at the point spread for the Boston College Notre Dame game. So it's at Notre Dame minus 13.5. Okay. And the over-under is 50. So what are you thinking here for a score?
Well, I think the good news, AJ, is Notre Dame did not get voted number one. They still got Alabama in front of them. So, when you beat number one,
a little bit?
Well, a bit, but also when you're not getting your just desserts, so to speak, and we didn't leap to number one, there's going to be a bit of a chip on their shoulder. I think that's going to be to our advantage, because let's face it, there was a lot of jubilation after this game, well-played game, a lot of emotional energy expended in this game. You got to revamp all that and get ready. It's going to be difficult, but I think that they're going to actually get it done, and they're not going to come up and be snuck up on and be dead in that game. So quite honestly, I think they're going to probably beat the spread. They're going to not crush the spread, but I think they'll beat the spread. And I think that it's going to be a relatively high-scoring affair. Of course, I don't know what the weather's going to be like there, but I'm going to guess that it's going to be a little high-scoring affair. So they're certainly going to go over the 50 points. I think you said is the total
over under. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking you're going to be in the 38 to 24 range, 38 to 24, where the Irish get the W.
So this team has two guys on offense I want to focus on real quick. Is Zay Flowers, the wide receiver, and 6'5" tight end at 253, junior Hunter Long. I've watched a little bit of Boston College, and Zay Flowers is fantastic, and Hunter Long gets it done pretty darn well as well. So with that, I think you're looking at 2 touchdowns for BC. I think you're looking at, I'll give them 2 field goals, so I think 17 points for BC. I think Notre Dame gets at least 2 on the. Go ahead,
young man, if I may. You said 2 touchdowns and 2 field goals, and you gave him 17 points. We talked about your math skills.
So let's give them 2 touchdowns and 1 field goal.
Okay, that's your 17.
Keep them at 17. You are just you are delightful to have on this podcast. So give them 17 points. No, you keep talking. You do your thing. I'll just.
And I'm just saying I'll never be invited back because you've had enough of Dad on this.
No, I could never. So giving them 17 points. I'm starting to consider 20 points because this isn't home and it's coming off a huge win. You know what? I'll give them maybe a 20 points on a fatigued defense here. I'll say Notre Dame gets 1 through the air, 2 on the ground at least, and 1 miscellaneous touchdown. That's sort of how I go with Notre Dame, especially against a defense as bad as Boston College's. So 28, I'll say maybe 2 field goals for the Irish. So I'll say 34-20, a little bit under the spread. I don't know if they're going to cover this. I could see them getting in the mid-30s and keeping Boston College to maybe 17, something like that, maybe 13 or something like that, maybe 2 field goals and a touchdown. I'll be safe here coming off a big game, and I'll say 34-20.
Well, that sounds interesting. So the interesting thing, the most interesting about it is we're both 14 points, which beats the spread by half a point. So I think it's going to be a solid win for them. I think they're going to be strong. Whether they dominate or not will depend on how much the fatigue factor, gets involved versus the hangover from last week. But I just think that this team has so many good players that if you're not stepping up, you will be stepping out, and they'll have somebody in there that's hungry and make it happen. So I think that's going to work out fine. If Book is able to grow on this particular game, it could be even a bigger spread than that. If he can, take what he learned last week and continue to grow with it. But at the end of the day, I just don't think they're going to get shocked by this Boston College team, and they're going to bring home a nice solid W.
So what's your score there?
It's 38-24.
38-24. I like it. So last week, Dad, you were 28-24, if I remember correctly. One of us was 23-27. The other was 28-24.
Either way, 28-24. Yeah.
Okay. So the score was 33-33 before, because we're not predicting overtime. So 33-33. I think the game it trended at least in a very similar trajectory. I thought we didn't think it would be outlandish by half or by end of regulation. I think we were, off by about a touchdown a piece and a couple points here and there, but we did okay there. So, Dad, that about wraps it up here. We're going to pause real quick for a quick and painless word from our sponsor right before we end. Hey, do you want to start a podcast? Perhaps share your experience and insights with the world? Great. Here at the Shall We Football Podcast, we don't care what you do, at all. But Anchor does. If you want to start a podcast, just go with Anchor. It is everything you need to make a podcast in one place. They will distribute